the meantime, I knew General Lee here. He was coming up from Shenandoah Valley to get the war out of Virginia, to relieve Virginia. And I thought to myself, you know, if I come riding in from the west, headed east, he's coming up from the north, the Yankees going to think the war's coming to them. And maybe we can end this war a lot quicker. So I rode up to Tennessee, Louisville, Kentucky, crossed the river into southern Indiana. I fought a couple different little battles in southern Indiana. I made my way to Cincinnati. I crossed the river there. And I started riding across southern Ohio. Well, I had an army of around 1,400 men, and it's a little hard to keep that many men under control. And I will admit that they did rob some banks. We stole a few chickens. But the funniest thing, and I remember this was getting towards the end of our raid. We went into this little town in southern Indiana, and one of my privates stole a canary and its cage. And we were on the run for 2 more weeks after that incident. And you know, the day I surrendered, we still had that canary in its cage on horseback. I was like, I don't know what, maybe you never had a pet as a child.
Did you think of the canary when they put you in a cage?
Well, yeah, I felt like a canary in a cage when they put me in prison. So I came through southern Ohio, and that summer, and Lee experienced the same problem with his trip north. It's been a very wet summer, and a lot of spots in the river were swollen up, and I couldn't ford the river. I got to a place called Buffington Island, Ohio. And keep in mind, at this point I've been on the run for almost 25 days. I had ridden pretty close to 900 miles. And I thought, we got to stay here and fight. And the funny thing in all this, I'm 1,400 men or so. They got over 30,000 men chasing me. And the funniest thing is, I got accused of being in little towns that I was 50 miles away from there. There's no way I could have ridden into them towns. I probably caused more damage by the home guards panicking that I was coming, that they were tearing their own towns up. But I was the one that got accused of tearing little towns up along southern Ohio. Well, I fought here at Buffington Island, and we started to break the Union lines. They had gunboats after us on the Ohio River, and there was a spot, and we forded the river. I got halfway across that river, we got half of our men out, and I looked back, and there were still over 400 of my men on the other side of that river fighting for their lives. And I turned to my brother-in-law, Basil Duke, and I said, get the boys back home. I'm going back to leave these men. And I could have been home free, but I was not going to abandon them men, because they had been through with me thick and thin, many fights. And I turned back across that river, and I went back to my men. And I don't know how we did it, but we fought on, and I escaped out of that little pickle. So I decided to start riding north and east, and I kept trying to find another place to cross the river. It would be blocked off by a gunboat. The home guard. So I went on about another 7 days after that battle, and I ended up in northeastern Ohio, north of East Liverpool, a small town called West Point, near Lisbon. Now, if anybody knows where Youngstown, Ohio is, Lisbon is not too far south of Youngstown. It was there on July 26th that I surrendered. I was the only Confederate general to make it that far north of any mass of army. I'm the only Confederate general ever to set foot in the state of Ohio during the war. Although, from what I understand, we had some men from Ohio that fought for the Confederacy. And even in my own regiment of soldiers, I had several men from the state of Ohio. And coming through Ohio, they helped guide me. And I think that's why I did have a lot of success in southern Ohio, was because of the Ohioans that believed in fighting with me. At this point, I got a free shave and a haircut. They sent me to the state pen in Columbus, Ohio, and shaved my head. No, not very good part. They also shaved my beard. Now I'm a Southern gentleman, and you know, our facial hair and our long hair is very important because it makes us natural. We're charming with ladies. But I had petitioned to get out of that prison because it was a civilian prison. It was a state prison. I felt that I should not have been there. Most of my officers went to Johnson Island, out near Cedar Point, Lake Erie. A lot of them froze to death that winter. Most of my enlisted men were shipped off on a train and ended up in Chicago, Illinois, at a prison camp called Camp Douglas. And I will tell you, the day that my men arrived, one of my black soldiers was with them, and when he went through the gate, the guards looked at him and they shot him. And a little later on, one of our other Sergeant Eli, he'll talk a little bit about the black prison stuff. As I was in prison, and there's not really much to do there, to play cards, I could feel the draft. And so I knew there was air coming from somewhere in this little prison. Well, we had suspected that underneath the floor, maybe there was ventilation shaft. Well, on a hunch, we stole some utensils from the commissary after supper, got some knives and spoons and forks, and we started chipping at the floor in my cell. And after several weeks worth of work during the night, I managed to make a hole in the floor. And sure enough, there was a shaft. And it was November 25th. And it was complete, and I knew I could squeeze through there. I had to. I didn't want to be in there any longer. And so the next morning, the sun was out, and I thought, this isn't going to be good, because they had dogs running around the courtyard of the prison, and we had to go through that courtyard and shimmy over a wall. And I'm like, but I got to do this. I can't stay here any longer because I was in fear that they were going to find this hole in the floor. Now, we had a piece of carpet we put over it during the day, and the guards were never suspicious that we had made this hole. That night, I woke up and it started raining, and there were skylights, and I could hear the rain hitting the skylights. This is it, we're going to go for it. Which was good because the dogs, because it was raining, they're going to be pinned up on the other side of the prison. And now, I knew the guard was going to come through, and this was about midnight. Well, we had a plan. I was a mason, and got word out to masons in the area that I needed some help. So they had arranged to get us some clothing and some money and put it in the designated area. We had taken our bed sheets, ripped them up, made a rope, stole the poker out of a hot-belly stove, and That's how we were going to get over the wall. We would loop it, get over the wall, and run. So, just shortly after midnight. Now the other catch is, I had to catch a train at 1 a.m. We knew the train schedule. There was a train leaving at 1 a.m. from Cincinnati, Ohio. Shortly after midnight, the guard walked through. We got down to the end of the hall. I took the carpet, got it out of the way. Through the hole I went. Out through the shaft, into the courtyard, up over the wall. You know, got to the spot where the clothes was hidden for me. Got my money, walked down to the train station, and bought a ticket. Got on the train. Then I was wandering through the cars, and we started pulling out of the train station, and I got to wandering through the cars, and I seen this fine-looking Union officer. I believe he was a major, and I sat down next to him, and we engaged in a conversation, and we come past the prison. We've just been in there less than an hour ago. And he looks at me and he says, "You know, that's the prison where we got John Hunt Morgan." And I says, "Oh, well, I hope we are safe from it." I never suspected that he was sitting right next to John Hunt Morgan. And that's another thing that made me a good fighter, because I wasn't afraid. I would masquerade, and this was primarily what I wore most of the time, because I could be a businessman, or I could put a blue Yankee coat on and become a Union colonel. There was many a times I rode right into a camp, and I would come in and said, "Anybody got word on Morgan and where he's at?" And they would spill their guts what they thought, and I would tell them, "Well, I heard he was over here." And I would set a trap. I captured more Union soldiers that way by being brave and going into their camps and getting information.
Cool.
Anyways, get back to escaping. Just about daybreak, the train got down to Cincinnati, Ohio, and I knew by this time word had to be out that John Hunt Morgan had escaped. The state of Ohio had over $1,000 bounty on me, so that's a lot of money. We come to a curve, the train had slowed down enough that I jumped off. I rolled down an embankment, and I could see the Ohio River. I walked down the Ohio River. I found a young man. Paid him a few bucks, and he took me across the river, and I was never so glad to see the state of Kentucky. The nice thing in all this was, the previous winter, I had met a nice young lady by the name of Maddie, and we had dated a few months, and I took her hand in marriage, and I got to spend Christmas of 1863, and that was the greatest Christmas gift I could ever have. And in that January, I went to see Robert E. Lee about a new commission and raising a new army, because after that raid, I pretty much lost most of my army, and I went to see him, and that's the first time we actually got to meet. And we did. General Lee seen to it that I got a new command. And I guess that's really about all I want to say about myself. I'll be available for questions and answers after the other generals get done. Now I'd like to introduce my best friend on and off the battlefield, Nathan Bedford.
Those of you who weren't here before, I'll just start from the beginning, and I'll just maybe add a few things there.